Man is the substance in which the spiritual being of the human being incarnates and is held incarnatus. So when we hear the word became flesh, that's our experience. Is that our word, our spirit being, has become flesh. But if that just continued, we wouldn't want to go back into the spiritual world. And so the egotism that was required had to kind of be seeded with another gesture. So the gesture that was needed was a sacrificial gesture. And so people would say, well, isn't that a bit of a brutal thing to crucify a human being, and why would that be such a good thing? I go, well, have you never been crucified in your life? Maybe not physically, but goodness, has no one ever actually taken you apart publicly and crucified you? Because if it hasn't happened, wait for it. It's part of human life is for the personality to be completely humiliated. It might not be on a cross, but sometimes it feels like that. So a mystical death is important. But what happens is that what used to be in the old mystery centers, so all these mysteries of death and resurrection used to happen in the Apollo mysteries and the Osiris mysteries, all the pre-Christian mysteries had this story of mystical deaths, temple sleeps where people were put to sleep and then reawakened, where they had gone through a sort of death and resurrection process. And what then needed to happen was that at this point in history, where the Roman Empire, so to say, becomes this moment where personality perfects itself. So this process of emancipating ourselves out of the blood relationships, if you look at the end of Egypt, the Ptolemies, kind of the end of the Egyptian pharaohs, where the last blood relationships are breaking apart. And then the Romans come, and the way a Roman feels who they are is as a citizen, not as a Roman. I'm a citizen of Rome, I'm not just part of the collective. And this is the moment kind of given to us in imagery where humanity, especially in the Mediterranean cradle of civilization, has said, I am an individual. And that's why the Christ uses that language, I am. This is who you are. But now we need to see something where we can rebuild our relationship to each other out of love. And so the Christ comes in, the Son being comes into a human body, and what used to take place in mystery centers in secret takes place in a personality in public. So all the mysteries are put on public display through the personality of Jesus for all of us to behold. And by that bloodletting, a new image is given for our spirituality. The old image is Eve and the serpent. So Eve and the serpent is not a bad image. The relationship of Eve to the serpent is, I have a part of my being that wants to learn through being passionately involved with the sensuous world. I want to touch things and I want to eat things. It's not about sex. I mean, it includes that, but it's not. We've kind of driven it into that horrible place. But it's about, as a human being cut off, the only way I can learn about the world is to take it in sensually, through all the senses. But I also now have to learn by another thing, and by letting go my ego, I can learn something inwardly. And that is given the image of the Lamb of God. So the Lamb is the one who gives up its blood. And so the Christ being comes into the Jesus body and releases the blood from its attachment to the personality as a seed gesture for humanity. So yes, there's a mystical process for us to learn that, but it had to happen once in a human being. Just as the Buddha had to fulfill the Eightfold Path, Jesus had to fulfill this gesture of seeding the blood with a selflessness, because it had become too selfish. And if we don't have a seeding of selflessness in our blood, we will just then land up killing each other. So we could say, the Christ seed in our blood isn't yet mature. And that's part of the practicing of Easter, is how do we learn to let go of our passionate attachment to our self-learning and learn through a different process. There's a deep mystical process in this. And we will. We medicalize suffering rather than use the dark emotions of suffering and hatred and rage to actually bring about a wiser knowledge of selfless love. So we need these two gestures. And the place that was seeded is known as the mystery of Golgotha, or the Christ being. But I think we shouldn't get away from the fact that it was definitely a public process in a personality. What the resurrection is then something completely new comes out of the grave on Easter Sunday. That, it's not the body of Jesus. It's not an historical figure. It's much more a kind of archetypal spiritual body that comes out, that is going to be our future being. We could say a future archetype of our humanity is created for the first time. And that's coming towards us, and that's the being that we call the Christ being. It's almost like it's a religious temple of our perfected humanity to which we are walking, and he's drawing us. We don't even have to say he, because it goes beyond gender. The Christ being is beyond gender. So we could call her the Christa, Christ or Christa. A woman can relate to the Christ being as calling her the Christa. The grammatical and the historical gender has to fall away, and we've become so entrenched in the old language. We've got to crack that open now. And one way of cracking it open is living it, I think, is trying to live it more geomantically and more cosmologically. I do think that's happening. But, churchianity is strong.
Churchianity.